My biggest concern with Charlie as a patient is substance abuse and depression from the disease more than what the HIV virus could do in terms of shortening his life, because it's not going.
There is a moment in every public story when the curtain finally comes down, not with a roar, but with a quiet and unmistakable finality. For Charlie Sheen, that moment has been building for years, led under court dates, tabloid headlines, and a silence from Hollywood that grew louder with every passing season. And now, with the legal chapter of his life reaching a point that few could have predicted, and with a confession-filled Netflix documentary laying bare truths he spent decades hiding, the question being asked across the entertainment world is one that nobody seems entirely ready to answer. Is this really the end of Charlie Sheen's story, or is it the beginning of something none of us saw coming? Because standing between those two possibilities is a legal verdict, a financial reckoning, and a man who has spent the last several years attempting to quietly do something he never managed to do at the height of his fame, and that is to face himself honestly. To understand where Charlie Sheen stands today, you have to understand just how far he once climbed and how quickly the ground disappeared beneath him. Born Carlos Erwin Estevez in 1965, the son of acclaimed actor Martin Sheen, Charlie entered a world already shaped by performance and expectation. His first credited film role came when he was just 9 years old, and by the time he reached his early 20s, he had appeared in landmark films like Platoon and Wall Street, earning a reputation as one of the most naturally gifted actors of his generation. The industry took notice. Studios wanted him. Audiences loved him. And for a while, everything seemed to be building toward a legacy that would endure for decades. His father's steady professionalism had given him a blueprint, even if he would spend much of his adult life struggling to follow it. The contrast between the two men, one defined by quiet discipline, the other increasingly defined by its absence, would become one of the more quietly heartbreaking subplots of Charlie's entire public story. Growing up in Malibu as part of a family deeply embedded in Hollywood, Charlie had access to an environment that most aspiring actors spend their entire careers trying to reach. He was surrounded by people who understood the craft, took it seriously, and built lives around it with intention. Yet proximity to that world also meant proximity to its excesses, to the parties, the social circles, and the culture of abundance that tends to accompany fame at the highest levels. What might have grounded another person in gratitude and discipline instead created a kind of baseline familiarity with indulgence that would later prove difficult to separate from his identity. His ambition was real. His talent was real. The hunger to be recognized on his own terms, separate from his father's towering reputation, was real. But those things existed alongside something else, a restlessness that the early films could channel productively, but that the later years of peak celebrity would struggle to contain. Then came 2.5 Men in 2003, and the entire equation changed. The CBS sitcom became one of the highest-rated comedies in television history. And at the peak of its success, Charlie Sheen was earning more per episode than any other actor on television, a record he still technically holds to this day. He was everywhere. His face was on magazine covers, his name was on everyone's lips, and the role of Charlie Harper, the carefree, wisecracking bachelor who never quite grew up, fit him so naturally that audiences began to wonder where the character ended and the real man began. His co-star John Cryer, who worked alongside him for 8 years, later reflected in the Netflix documentary on the strangeness of watching someone so genuinely talented operate while clearly carrying something heavy in the background that nobody was fully addressing. The show was a phenomenon. The actor was a phenomenon. And underneath all of it, something was quietly breaking. Behind the polished surface of that television success, Sheen's struggles with substance use were not a secret within Hollywood circles, even if the general public only caught glimpses through occasional headlines. The pattern was one that many people close to him recognized, but few knew how to stop. For long stretches of time, he managed to keep his professional life separated from his personal chaos, showing up on set and delivering performances while privately engaged in a lifestyle that was taking a severe physical and emotional toll. Directors and co-stars noted a contradictory duality in him, the ability to arrive on set after a night that would have leveled most people and still find something real in a scene. But that capacity for compartmentalization had its limits, and those limits were being approached much faster than the outside world understood. The human body can absorb a certain amount of punishment before the evidence becomes impossible to contain, and eventually, it did. By 2011, the wall between those two worlds collapsed entirely. The public breakdown that followed became one of the most widely covered celebrity implosions in modern entertainment history. Sheen was fired from 2.5 Men following an escalating series of conflicts with the show's production team and creator Chuck Lorre. What came next shocked people who thought they had already seen everything. In a series of interviews that spread across television and social media, Sheen delivered increasingly erratic statements, introduced phrases like tiger blood and winning into the cultural vocabulary, and seemed determined to engage with the entire spectacle on his own unconventional terms. Some people laughed. Others felt genuine concern. Most could not look away. The phrase public meltdown barely captured the scale of what unfolded over those weeks and months, as one of the most successful actors in television stood at a microphone and seemed determined to blow up every remaining bridge. In retrospect, people who were watching closely noted that beneath the defiance was someone clearly in crisis, reaching for control in the only way that felt available to him at the time. The legal fallout from that period was significant and long-lasting. Court appearances, restraining orders, and financial disputes became recurring features of his life in the years that followed. His 3 marriages had each ended in conflict and drawn heavy public attention. His first, to Donna Peel in 1995, lasted barely a year. His marriage to actress Denise Richards in 2002 produced 2 daughters, but unraveled after 5 years amid ongoing personal difficulties. His third marriage, to Brooke Mueller in 2008, brought twin sons named Bob and Max into the world before ending in divorce just 2 years later. The custody arrangements and financial obligations that followed from all of these relationships would become a defining feature of his life for years to come. And it was specifically the financial obligations tied to his twin sons with Mueller that would eventually return him to court in a way that shook even people who had grown accustomed to hearing his name connected to legal proceedings. In December 2025, Brooke Mueller filed court documents making a demand that sent shockwaves through the entertainment press. According to those filings, reported by TMZ and confirmed across multiple major publications, Mueller alleged that she owed her approximately $15 million in unpaid child support and accumulated interest. The figure was staggering. According to the documents, Sheen had been ordered to pay $660,000 per year in child support for their twin sons, who were 16 years old at the time of the filing. Mueller's paperwork laid out a meticulous accounting of what she claimed Sheen had actually paid over more than a decade, and the numbers told a troubling story. She alleged that he had made full payments only through June of 2011, and that from July 2011 onward, payments were either partial or entirely absent for years at a stretch. She claimed he made no payments whatsoever in 2019, 2020, 2021, or 2022, with only token amounts in the years that followed. The total she sought, including roughly $6.4 million in interest on top of the unpaid principal of nearly $9 million, came to just over $15,300,000, and she requested the full amount within 30 days. The filing laid bare the financial reality behind a name that had once been synonymous with the highest levels of Hollywood success. At the peak of his run on 2.5 Men, Sheen had commanded $2 million per episode. By the mid-2020s, the distance between that era and his financial situation had become impossible to ignore. Legal analysts noted that if a settlement could not be reached privately, the situation could escalate to asset freezes and further enforcement measures. The stakes were very real, and so was the pressure on a man already carrying years of personal and professional setbacks. Mueller's filing also requested that Sheen cover her legal fees for reopening the matter, adding another layer of financial exposure to an already severe situation. For his twin sons, now teenagers thrust into the middle of a tabloid-covered dispute that involved numbers larger than most people see in a lifetime, the human cost extended well beyond the dollars and cents. In a development that offered at least some indication that both parties wanted to avoid an even more explosive public proceeding, court records confirmed in early February 2026 that Sheen and Mueller had agreed to delay the scheduled hearing in order to pursue a private resolution. Sheen committed to providing a detailed financial accounting, and both sides appeared willing to negotiate away from open court. It was a small but meaningful step back from what could have become an even more damaging confrontation. Whether that effort would ultimately produce a lasting resolution remained uncertain, but the agreement to try quietly first was noted by people who had watched their conflicts play out in public over many years. What made this legal moment feel particularly weighted was its timing. Just months before Mueller's filing landed, Something had shifted in how the world was talking about Charlie Sheen, and it had shifted in a direction that genuinely surprised most observers. On September 10, 2025, Netflix released a two-part documentary titled AKA Charlie Sheen, directed by Andrew Renzi. The film did not offer the kind of carefully managed image rehabilitation that celebrities sometimes arrange when they hire filmmakers to reframe their story favorably. Instead, it went somewhere far more uncomfortable and, ultimately, far more compelling. Sheen had no editorial control over the finished product, and the director made clear that was an intentional and essential part of how the project was built from the beginning. 7 years into sobriety, Sheen sat down and spoke with a candor that caught even longtime observers off guard. He addressed his decades of substance use with specific and sometimes startling honesty, describing periods of addiction so severe that they had put him in genuine physical danger on multiple film sets. He spoke about his HIV diagnosis, which he had publicly disclosed in 2015 after years of keeping it private, and reflected on what it had meant to carry that reality while being one of the most scrutinized people in the country. He discussed his relationships, his repeated failures as a partner, and the painful distance that had grown between himself and the people who mattered most to him during his worst years. He described the turning point that finally broke through, a quiet domestic failure involving his daughter Sami and his inability to do something as simple as drive her to a hair appointment because he was no longer capable of getting behind the wheel safely. That small, ordinary moment, he said in the documentary, was the thing that made denial impossible to sustain any further. He credits his desire to genuinely show up for his kids as the driving force behind everything that followed. The documentary spent 3 weeks on Netflix's global top 10 list for English-language films. The audience that found it was not simply consuming another celebrity confession as entertainment. Many people who watched it came away with something they had not expected, a genuine sense of the human being behind years of tabloid coverage, someone who had caused real harm, acknowledged it in specific and unflinching terms, and was still in the middle of figuring out what a life rebuilt from that wreckage actually looks like day to day. Director Renzi, who spent 2 years developing the project and approaching Sheen carefully before the actor agreed, put it plainly in interviews after the film's release. "The only Charlie that I've ever known is a Charlie who's sober," he said. "I don't think he would have been able to do this 8 years ago." The documentary also featured candid testimony from people including John Cryer, Chris Tucker, Sean Penn, and both ex-wives Denise Richards and Brooke Mueller, all of whom engaged with a degree of honesty that matched Sheen's own willingness to let the record stand without flattering edits. The industry response was concrete. In October 2025, just weeks after the documentary's premiere, Sheen signed with WME, William Morris Endeavor, one of the most powerful talent agencies in the entertainment business, marking his return to major representation for the first time in years. The agency would work with him across film, television, unscripted content, and brand partnerships. He had previously been with WME during his 2.5 years, left in 2009, operated without an agent through the most chaotic stretch of his life, had a brief stint with another agency, and was now returning. For an actor who had spent years largely on the outside of the professional infrastructure that sustains careers in Hollywood, the signing was a meaningful signal that at least some serious industry players believed there was something worth representing. The Netflix documentary had spent 3 weeks in the global top 10. His memoir, The Book of Sheen, published by Gallery Books through Simon & Schuster the day before the documentary's premiere, became a New York Times bestseller and remained in the top 10 for 3 consecutive weeks. Those are not numbers that a talent agency ignores. A television project has been in development that would, if it finds a home, mark his most visible on-screen return in years. Ramble On, a dramedy created by Doug Ellen, the writer and producer behind Entourage, features Sheen alongside Kevin Connolly and Kevin Dillon, following characters who are Hollywood veterans attempting to restart careers that had stalled. A pilot was produced in 2022. And as of late 2024 and into 2025, the show was still being actively pitched to networks and streaming platforms. The autobiographical undertones of a story about aging Hollywood figures trying to find their way back to relevance will not be lost on anyone who watches it, and that self-awareness may be part of what makes it compelling if it gets made. His father Martin Sheen is reportedly part of the cast, which would bring a dimension to the project that goes beyond the professional. None of this means the road ahead is straightforward. The child support dispute remained an active legal matter as of early 2026. His relationship with his twin sons, now teenagers who have grown up in the shadow of public headlines about their father, exists in a complicated space between genuine connection and the accumulated weight of documented absence. His HIV management requires ongoing attention. The years away from major projects have left gaps that a documentary and a book deal do not automatically fill, and the entertainment industry, however warm its recent reception, has a famously short memory and an even shorter attention span. Legitimate questions about whether audiences and studios are ready to fully invest in a sustained comeback are not hostile questions. They are reasonable ones. And yet the evidence for something genuinely different is also real and specific. 8 years of sobriety, documented and confirmed across multiple independent sources, is a serious achievement for someone who spent decades in the grip of a lifestyle that nearly destroyed him. His willingness to sit in front of a camera with no editorial control and answer questions about the most damaging chapters of his life, without deflecting, without performing a contrition he did not feel, and without trying to minimize what he had done to people he cared about, was recognized by critics and audiences alike as something qualitatively different from the defensive posturing that had characterized so many of his earlier public moments. The documentary reviews were divided, as honest assessments of complicated subjects tend to be, but the consensus across the responses was that whatever the film's structural limitations, the man at its center was not hiding. What the final sentence of Charlie Sheen's public story actually turns out to be is still being determined. The sentences already handed down across more than 3 decades, by courts, by studios, by an industry that stopped calling, and by a media ecosystem that feasted on his worst moments and then grew bored when those moments stopped arriving on schedule, were real and in many cases deserved. He caused genuine harm to people who trusted him. He failed financial obligations to his children across years when the resources to meet those obligations had existed and been spent elsewhere. He damaged professional relationships that took years and significant personal effort to begin repairing. Those are not small things, and they do not disappear because a documentary was well received or because a talent agency sees commercial potential.